Hello, everyone. Today I saw Verdi's Rigoletto, and it was a very nice performance. The singing was very good. The props and all the settings and the scenes looked extremely nice. Overall, it was a very nice experience. But also, this was an opera that I was only kind of vaguely familiar with. I'd never really seen it performed, and in fact, I've never even watched any of the versions of it that you can just find for free on YouTube. I'd only kind of read some synopses here and there. But of course, everybody's heard the most famous song from Rigoletto, which is La Donna e Mobile.
La donna mobile, qual piuma al vento, muta del cielo e di pensiero.
And that song is considered very infamous these days because it's considered quite sexist. Now, at the time, it really wasn't. The criticisms at the time were that it was. Just give me a moment here. Let's see. Although immensely successful with audiences from the beginning, many critics in various countries condemned the work for its dark and bitterly tragic plot combined with a succession of mere popular tunes as they thought of the music. After the first performance in Venice in 1851, the Gazzetta Ufficiale di Venezia deplored the fact that, in his opinion, the libretto was inspired by the Satanic school, and Verdi and Piave had sought beauty from the defamed and repulsive. This just comes from the Wikipedia, so it's a very short part of the article on it. But basically, those are the two main criticisms, that it is kind of making light of a lot of very dark themes. But then also, this note about it being inspired by Satanism, to me, actually, it did strike me as extremely satanic. So I actually think some of those criticisms, if those are things that you don't want in your opera, then would not recommend, I don't think. But of course, nowadays, the criticism comes from a different angle. Perhaps you might call it pious, but of another variety. So I'm going to read this article I found, which is more of the modern feminist angle, as well as an interesting bit that was included in the program to introduce this opera, and then afterwards I'll kind of share my thoughts on it. Verdi kept Rigoletto's most famous aria, La Donna e Mobile, under wraps until the dress rehearsal for the 1851 Venetian premiere. The secrecy was well warranted. Legend has it that the gondoliers were singing the song by the end of that first night's performance. Music that was too popular was not Verdi's only problem. When northern Italy was still under Austrian rule, the imperial censors considered an opera about a sex-addict king, for such was the plot of Victor Hugo's play Le Roi s'amuse, on which Rigoletto is based, politically problematic. The protagonist was demoted to duke, and the setting moved to 16th century Mantua, which had the additional advantage that the then ducal family, the Gonzagas, had entirely died out by Verdi's time, with no one left to take offense at the unflattering portrayal. The story of a poor girl conned and seduced by powerful men, who also just forces himself on women when deceit won't work, remains profoundly resonant today. Such sorry tales play out with depressing frequency on television and in newspaper headlines. Pues si cambia, the more things change, we can almost hear Verdi telling us. Not content with mere social commentary, however, Verdi gives us Rigoletto, the jester who has mocked his share of Duke's victims, yet who suddenly sees the other side of the issue when it's his daughter Gilda who's the victim. Suddenly, old and pitiable, he swears vengeance against his erstwhile employer. But it is Gilda, however, who is knifed by the hired assassin Sparafusil, a man proud of his honor as an honest brigand, until he cheats, not for money, but upon the entreaties of his love-struck streetwalker sister. What goes around comes around. And yet, in the midst of all this human ugliness and moral uncertainty, the pure die, the evil prosper, the sins of the father are paid by the daughter. Verdi also gives us not just the incomparable La Donna e Mobile, beloved by tenors and audiences alike since that very first night, but also one of the most touching love duets ever written. Maybe, just maybe, we think, the Duke loves Gilda after all. And a final act quartet astounding in its beauty and complexity, in which four people express their thoughts all at the same time, and yet somehow we understand it all. Rigoletto remains as morally unsettling and musically uplifting as on that triumphant opening night more than 160 years ago. There's also a very important plot point that isn't mentioned in this summary involving Gilda sacrificing herself. Her father asked her to disguise herself as a man and to flee, and she decides not to go through with this. And instead, she overhears the plot to murder the Duke, and she decides to enter the building where he's staying, knowing that this is going to end with her death. Now, the fact that she was dressed as a male, I think, is very important. I think she needed to be dressed as a male in order for her to be this random sort of victim. And this is the classic comparison you see. You know, it's a woman being sexually abused is seen as equivalent or often more important than males being victims of the kind of violence that actually ends your life. We are expected to look upon a setting where men are murdering and being murdered over the honor of women and to say, oh my god, I can't believe this man is dishonoring women. And you can see this gynocentrism embodied in the article I found here. Seattle Opera updates Rigoletto as a stand-in for misogynist leaders, written by Marcy Silman, August 9th, 2019. This was published in kuow.org. You say you don't know anything about opera? Chances are you've heard some of the art form's most famous melodies, from Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries to Figaro, 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 one of the show-stopping arias in Barber of Seville, without realizing it. These tunes and more have been featured in Super Bowl ads, film parodies, even cartoons, but most Americans have never seen the source material that made opera an intrinsic part of Western European culture. Even though opera companies across Europe and North America regularly present the classics, part of the challenge has been producing culturally resonant versions of the stories that often read as racist, sexist, and abusive today. Take Giuseppe Verdi's Rigoletto, for example. One of the most famous and most produced works in the canon, this opera features the aria La Donna Immobile, a catchy earworm with some of opera's most sexist lyrics. Woman is fickle, like a feather in the wind. She changes her voice and her mind. Always sweet, pretty face, in tears or laughter she is always lying. Rigoletto is the story of the Count of Mantua, a man whose serial sexual abuses are abetted by his jester, Rigoletto. That is, until the court targets Rigoletto's beloved daughter, Gilda. Perhaps more disturbing to contemporary audiences, despite the Count's degrading treatment, Gilda continues to profess her love for him. How do you make that story relevant to contemporary audiences? Lindy Hume is stage director for Seattle Opera's new Rigoletto. She updated this classic in 2012, when Italy's Silvio Berlusconi was on trial for his sexual abuses. Hume doesn't cite Donald Trump by name, but in a recent article, Hume writes that as a feminist in 2019, how could she resist focusing on the excesses of extreme wealth, the corruption of high political power, and the moral void of the court, a stand-in for Trump's White House? And of course, this is a very feminist treatment of this subject. They see these men as the patriarchy, and the only victims that they really care about are the women. But it's called Rigoletto because he's the main character, and it's all of the conflicts surrounding him that are the most interesting. He's a very protective father, perhaps to a fault. And of course, you can understand why that's the case. He's in this court where he's seeing all of these things happening, and of course, he kind of has to, goad on everything because he needs to, be jovial and laugh about things, and that's literally his job. He's a hunchback. He's relegated to this position. He doesn't really have a lot of social or economic power to do otherwise, and of course, he's trying to protect and provide for his daughter. Now, his daughter, of course, is kind of wanting to be free, right? She doesn't want to just be, stuck inside all day. I think she never goes outside. And because of this, when she has the opportunity to disobey her father, it's more tempting. This kind of makes you sympathize with Gilda a little bit, but personally, my sympathies were a bit limited. It seems they're in a very dangerous world. They're in a world where apparently it's very, very easy to hire an assassin. Their grand scheme to murder people is to have a prostitute lure them to their house where the brother can just murder them. It's not exactly a 4D chess there, right? It seems like if there was any real law enforcement in 16th century Mantua, right, in this setting here, that it would be pretty easy to shut down that kind of an operation, especially one that's apparently very, very easy for people to find. But it's a dangerous world. So I can kind of sympathize with the perspective that says, look, he does need to be extremely protective of her. And Gilda doesn't seem to appreciate this. Even when Rigoletto shows her firsthand, this is the man you fell for. Look, he's actually being duplicitous. He's actually lying to you. Even in that moment, she's witnessing him sing this song about how women are so fickle, right? And how women are always deceptive and how you can never trust them. And of course, Gilda embodies all of these characteristics. She's going along with a plan that will, that will fix things, presumably. But then, of course, she doesn't want to see him murdered because she is in love with him, even though he's a total womanizer. Now, this feminist article notes, how could something like this possibly be relatable? Most people, I think, can get the point of this and can find it relatable. That's why it's such a well-known, such a standard part of operatic repertoire, is because it tends to resonate with people. Of course, it's if you're a feminist, then most of things in popular culture, I guess, you're gonna have an issue with because you have a fucking problem with everything, right? So that's the real reason you gotta change it. They're not doing it for the audience; they're doing it for themselves, clearly. But the real takeaway from Rigoletto is it is actually kind of a MGTOW anthem. So the PUA character, he kind of gets off scot-free, right? He gets to do whatever he wants because he's just such a great seducer that even when these women are well aware of who he is, he doesn't even have to use any sort of force or any sort of lying to these women, really. They're just so fickle and stupid and vapid that they're so easily manipulated by him that he just gets away with everything anyway, is basically how things turn out in the end. You have, the assassin's sister, who is the streetwalker prostitute, who changes basically it convinces him to spare the Duke. And then you have Gilda, who decides willingly to fall into that trap, to trigger that trap in order to ensure that this Duke survives. And the real tragedy is that you have Rigoletto, who I think represents the sort of traditional conservative worldview, that he's just doing what he can. He's degrading himself, living in a role he doesn't want to be in, doing work he doesn't enjoy, just to provide for this girl who essentially betrayed him and betrayed that trust. And even the next main female character involved in this would be like the maid at Rigoletto's estate, who's supposed to be entrusted to watching over Gilda, who lets the Duke in disguise in. So all of these women are actually acting in exactly the way as this song, this famous song, depicts them. And that doesn't seem to be the criticism. It doesn't seem to be that these feminists are criticizing the actions of these female characters. Because in theory, that's what you would target, right? You wouldn't target the message. You would target the parts of the play that are reinforcing that message, rather than saying, oh, here's this character who is obviously depicted as a villainous character, because they had to change the time and the setting just so that no one would be offended and think that this character represented them, right? They're not offended by all of the female characters with agency in the play doing all of the things that show that his message, at least in the world of this opera, is true. Instead, they're saying, "Oh my God, how horrible is it that the villainous character is saying villainous things?" I think that no matter what kind of story you're consuming, you should try to take away a message from it, whether it's ethical, moral, or a little bit of both. And it seems like most people just look at this and they don't seem to get any sort of moral from it. Because what message are you going to get? It's not good to be a womanizer. Okay. Killing people can make people sad, whatever. Um, I guess don't goad on other people to do bad things for money. Maybe, but when we're looking at Rigoletto, he's a hunchback in this situation. We don't really know what other options he has, and I guess that's not really explored. It seems that for the purposes of the play, the reason you made him a hunchback is to kind of imply and to depict this sensation that he doesn't have other options. That's the point of making him a hunchback, is that he has to do this court jester things. And I think that what he's doing is all part of that job, which is why I really have a lot of trouble faulting him. I don't have trouble faulting characters like Gilda or like the assassin's prostitute sister or the maid, because they're not doing their jobs. They're not being honest. And of course, I'm not saying that they're absolutely villainous characters. They're flawed characters. They're interesting characters. So, but I think that's where the moral is. I wish that instead of women looking at the translation of La Donna e il Mobile and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. This is patriarchy. This is Western civilization. I can't believe that this is such a famous thing that's in there, that this is part of art, and that we never question this, and that this is all just normal, and that someone like the Duke is just a totally normal and accepted and, socially tolerated sort of a person in society." I think that's such a stupid message to come away with compared to something that says, for as many women as this song is going to be true of, how about not me? How about not a couple of these characters? And maybe looking at where these female characters did fall short of that standard, and to wonder how things might have turned out if they hadn't acted in that way. So those are some thoughts I had. Hopefully you found it interesting. And I guess this is continuing the theme of tragic tales surrounding clowns, but I think that's all we'll have for this month at least. Have a good day.